For 2 years, I skipped chanting in yoga because it felt awkward and weird. I was just there for the poses. But I discovered that by avoiding the one thing that made me the most uncomfortable, I wasn't just missing a piece of the practice, I was missing the whole point. I'm Sushmita, but you can call me Sushi, and I started yoga with just one goal: to touch my toes, to be able to hold a plank, and maybe do a crow pose without falling flat on my face. The spiritual stuff, that was just kind of like the incense scented packaging that it came in. And I was there during the chanting and I was just like moving my lips so I didn't look like, that odd one out. And I was peeking around to see like everyone else had their eyes closed and they were chanting with so much devotion. And I felt like they were all in on a secret. And I wasn't sure that I wanted to hear the secret in the first place. It wasn't until I actually discovered a renewable source of energy that changed everything for me in my life and my practice. If you want the complete system for a sustainable practice, check out my Yoga Mastery program. There is a link for that in the description below. But today I'm going to be showing you how I shifted from discipline to love and how to make the right choice the easiest choice. So let's dive right in. So I grew up in an orthodox South Indian household and I rebelled against religion right from the very beginning. I hated the rituals and anything that even seemed remotely spiritual. Even though I showed up on the mat and I pushed myself, I got stronger, my balance improved. I took a lot of pride in like what I could do with my body, and when others would like compliment my form or say like you look so graceful, I would get this kind of like quiet wave of satisfaction. But on the days when I would feel weak or I just couldn't do as much, I would get super frustrated and I would get angry, and I took it almost like a personal failure because that cycle of trying and failing is just somehow super exhausting. It kind of feels like you're trying to run up a downward moving escalator. You might make some progress, but you're working against this formidable force and eventually you're bound to get tired. Success makes us feel so proud of ourselves, and failure makes us feel angry and agitated and super frustrated. And my entire practice was chained to this kind of emotional roller coaster. A good practice meant I was good. A bad practice meant I was bad. And the focus was entirely on me, my performance, my progress, my body. And I was kind of missing the point and only focusing on the physical. Yoga has this incredibly comprehensive way of showing us that we're actually multifaceted beings. We're physical, energetic, psychological, and conscious beings. And it's designed to actually help us work on all of those levels. And I went on like this for a year or so, and I was just doing full primary series, and I'm sure you know how challenging it is. And I still felt this like creeping dissatisfaction like after my practices. I checked all the boxes, I could do the back bends, I held the poses, and I was breathing and I was pushing my limits. But the high of doing my first headstand had worn off, and I didn't know like, is this all there is to the Ashtanga practice? And I was just starting to question everything. It was like eating a meal and going to like this Instagram worthy cafe where like everything is pink and everything is perfect. It was beautifully presented, but it tasted awful and it had zero nutritional value. And it looked good, I looked good, but it wasn't like truly like sustaining me or nourishing me. And then I began to explore concepts that I'd earlier disregarded as just like spiritual fluff. The whole idea of like Ishvara Pranidhana, which is a concept of surrender to God, triggered me because yoga was sold to me as this secular thing, it was different from what I'd grown up with. And as someone who completely dismissed all things religious, I found it to be like passive and weak and just lame and like not solid advice. But then a teacher asked me, she was like, are you actually consciously beating your own heart right now? She asked me, are you actually digesting the meal that you just had? Is this effort like actually making your hair grow? And these are all like typical spiritual questions. But the answer was, of course, no. I'm not consciously, voluntarily doing those things as I speak, as I do my practice. And so acknowledging for me that there's this vast, profound intelligence that's operating inside of me, this intelligence that breathes me, that beats my heart, that does, all of this healing for me, that digests food for me without any conscious effort on my part, to me, that is a humbling thought. And it was the first time that I genuinely considered that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the sole author for my own existence. And this part was like really huge for me because I understood that I was part of this huge interconnected web of life, and I'm not just this person struggling on the mat for the glory of 10 seconds of a headstand trying to prove myself on this rectangular piece of rubber. The real change for me came when I was in Kerala on my gap year, and I remember this so clearly because I was at the Shivananda ashram. I sat there in the back with my friend who I convinced to come with me, and we both just chuckled the whole time, and we found it absolutely hilarious and ridiculous that these white people in ochre robes were telling me about my own culture. And I was like, what are all these people who are doing teacher trainings? They look so clueless, and the ashram food was just making them look so pale, and I was judging so much in my head. But chanting specifically was my personal nightmare because I was super awkward around singing and using my voice. And the room was full of people with some instruments and just sitting on cushions. And then it started. Basically, there was this guy, the leader, who was singing one line in Sanskrit, and then we would have to kind of sing it aloud back. It was call and response, right? And at first I did my usual thing where I just sat super silently, and I was feeling super self-conscious, and I was oh my gosh, I can't do this. And then after this whole awkward experience, the leader then explained about Bhakti Yoga. He said this is the path of love and devotion, and he explained this concept of kirtanam or chanting, and told us that it's one of the core practices, where he said something basically the point of chanting isn't to have a beautiful voice. The point is to just use your voice. And it's kind of like an offering. It's a way of saying over and over and over again, this is not about me. And for so long, it was always about me. And in that moment, my entire understanding of the practice just kind of flipped from the inside out. And really up to that point, I'd been so worried about how I sounded, whether I was being watched, how embarrassed I was. And it was kind of this invitation to use my voice for something else entirely, and to really coordinate my breath with the voice that was coming out of me with no expectation of getting anything back. It was just like an offering. And so I took a breath, and for the first time, I sang back loudly. And my voice was still kind of quiet and shaky at first, but it was I wasn't really listening to myself or really hearing myself. I was just adding my little bit of sound to the ocean of sound that was all around me. And I felt it in that moment. I felt a physical vibration that started to kind of rise in my chest and move through my whole body. And I felt this deep connection for the first time. And it was all these sharp edges of me that were analytical and critical and were so logical, were kind of dissolving into the warmth of the group. And right now, when I say this, I'm completely different because of Bhakti. And I finally stopped trying to understand chanting or see why I should chant, and just embrace the experience and let myself fully be there without judging it in my head. And so what I understood then was that the ego is kind of always this thing that wants to be the star of the show, and chanting and active devotion asks the ego to somehow, some way just step aside for a moment and become part of the choir, become part of the group. And it's hard for the ego to do this, right? And the idea of devotion for me completely started to rewire my practice, because I learned that faith is really important. It's really, really what keeps us on the mat for a long period of time. And it's the thing that kind of acts as a safety net. We chant in the beginning of the practice just to protect our minds as well. And the practice of yoga is kind of designed to bring up all of this stuff, our fears, our anxieties, our old emotional wounds, and trying to process all that stuff with just our limited minds, just our limited egos, can somehow be super overwhelming. But having faith, having that trust, having that guidance in something larger than yourself, that you don't have to carry it all, whether you call it God, the universe, or whatever you want to call it, it creates this container that's strong enough to hold all of that intensity, but also hold it safely so that you're not the one carrying it. And it gives you a place to kind of put things that are too heavy for you to carry, that you've been carrying for too long, in someone else's hands. And I know it sometimes feels like imagination and it doesn't feel real, but I also figured that my practice had been stalling and so dependent on my mood because I wasn't able to give it up to something higher. And I was running purely on willpower, and willpower, to be honest, is a finite resource. And so some mornings when I would just wake up either tired or just feel a bit lazy, the thought of like pushing through just felt like grueling and just like something I was forcing myself to do. But when I started practicing with devotion, I had this renewable source of energy that I could always tap into. That's when I discovered that love is far more powerful and sustainable as a motivator than discipline ever can be. And when your reason for practicing shifts from, I just have to do this thing so that I can get better, to, I get to do this to connect with myself, to connect with something sacred, everything changes. And your practice becomes fueled by love, not just like discipline. And that love never actually truly runs out because you can always generate more of it. And today my yoga practice looks unrecognizable. The postures are still there, the breathing is still there, but the intention is different. The intention behind it has totally changed. The poses aren't the destination for me anymore. They're kind of the preparation for me to experience this state of true devotion. It's how I tune the radio of my consciousness away from the static of my own thoughts and fears towards a clearer frequency. It's the one moment in my day where I joyfully step out of my own way. And what's so beautiful about this path of devotion or bhakti is that it's kind of for everyone. It doesn't ask you to believe in any specific religion or, believe in a specific God. Because yoga teaches us that the divine has many, many different forms and you can connect with it wherever it resonates with you. You don't have to particularly worship a deity or anything like that. The only real requirement is the humility to admit that you're not the center of the universe, and this openness to connect with this vast web of life that you're a part of. And looking back, I really think that my resistance to chanting was resistance to actually letting go of control and surrendering to the universe. So that's all I have for you today. By the way, if you still feel like you're awkward or self-conscious or you don't like the spiritual parts of a yoga class, you just need to learn how to understand it and work through it. And that's exactly what I do inside my Yoga Mastery program. If you want to learn more, there is a link for that in the description below where you can set up a call with me and we can just chat about these things, the things that you're struggling with, all your reservations about starting yoga. As always, if this video resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, comment down below if there's anything that you want me to make, and like this video, share this with your friends. I would be so happy if you did. Thank you so much for watching till the very end, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.